shepherd, the sangam leva, is the shepherd, he lets me rest in the field, in fields of green pastures. He gives me strength. Even if I walk to the valley of darkness, I'll fear no evil, for you are with me, Lord.
When this conflict started, we carried palm fronds to the streets, demanded just peace. Then, Blake did not listen. They called us names, declared war, and then we in turn decided to take up arms to support ourselves, to defend our people, and to defend our territory. That was a major front that was for the first time launched in the cause of fighting for independence for the southern Cameroons. So today, as Comrade Bo had just stated, this is another major front that is being launched here today. Not only will the Ambazonians hear this, but the international community is now going to hear from us at the International Criminal Court. And again, not only a lot of public is going to hear us, the international community will hear us. So we are taking another front besides the armed struggle in which we are now engaged in. It is for that reason we have these two gentlemen here with us from, what's the law from again?
Fein and DelValle.
DelValle.
Fein and DelValle. It is for that reason we have them here from the law firm Fein and DelValle. They will present to us today their mission and exactly how they are going to go about it. And I think every Ambazonian should mark this day because it's a historic day. It's a historic day for Ambazonia to be formally taking La République du Cameroun to the International Criminal Court. It's a groundbreaking event. And so, sir, thank you very much for coming. I will give you the microphone to brief our people what message you would like them to know, and international world too. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, if there are any Paul Biya spies in the audience, stand up. I'm disappointed since they might learn something. You have a message for Paul Biya. Remember, Libya's Colonel Gaddafi was indicted for genocide and crimes against humanity by the International Criminal Court. You know what his fate was. Omar al-Bashir of Sudan was also indicted for crimes against humanity and genocide. We know where he is. And I would suggest Cameroonian President Paul Biya should learn by those examples. It's altogether fitting, I believe, that this program is being held here at the National Press Club, in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., because I think the themes that justify the independence of Ambazonia were articulated in the United States over 200 years ago, the Declaration of Independence. And perhaps its most momentous phrase was that it's not only the right, but it's the duty of every people who witness a government seeking to reduce them to absolute despotism, to rise up, overthrow, and change that form of government for a substitute that promises to secure their inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I want to underscore the duty, not the right, the duty to overthrow despotism. And those words rang like a hammer on an anvil throughout all of the world at the time and shook the foundations of every tyranny all throughout Europe and Asia. And that's the message I think we want to send to President Biya, that we will be undertaking whatever efforts, whatever resources, whatever stamina is needed to ensure that you do not reduce Ambazonia to absolute despotism, that Ambazonia achieve its rightful place in the family of democratic nations that subscribe and practice the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Before I enter into a menu of initiatives that we anticipate, I want to underscore why this effort by Ambazonia to attain independence is not at all hopeless. It may be long. The long march was long. But in contemporary times, there are dozens of examples where peoples who have been subject to the most cruel barbarities have attained independence, irrespective of when borders were drawn. And we can think of Bangladesh, Montenegro, Kosovo, Namibia, Eritrea, South Sudan. Goes on and on and on. And there is no justification for withholding that same right or remedy from Ambazonia, who, as the slideshow witnessed, is every bit as much stricken by these horrors and unspeakable barbarities as has been witnessed since World War II, razing hundreds of cities and villages, burning women, children, totally and completely without remorse. The only reason why, in my judgment, it's received less publicity is because Mr. Biya has the protection of the French military, the French president, Mr. Macron. And because of the French prominence, he's able to shield Cameroun from the sunshine of publicity that would shock the conscience of the world if they could witness the ongoing horrors. And of course, there's nothing at all unusual about independence votes, even short of that degree of oppression. You may recall recently, Scotland voted on whether they should be independent of Great Britain. Quebec voted on whether they should be independent from largely English-speaking Canada. Those were free and unmolested votes. Both of them failed and may occur again. So this is a time-honored understanding that every people, including pursuant to United Nations General Assembly, decolonization resolutions, have a right to chart their own destiny through self-determination, which certainly has been denied Ambazonian people. So what do we anticipate in the future? And I mean that very short future. One effort that's been alluded to earlier is filing a petition with the International Criminal Court in The Hague that will charge not only Mr. Biya, but Mr. Macron himself and numerous of their subordinates in the French military and the Cameroun military with genocide and crimes against humanity. The chronicle of horrors is in the public domain. Some of it will be retrieved through affidavits. Those who fear retaliation need the protection of anonymity. But the International Criminal Court, once a charge is filed, there's an obligation on all signatories to assist in the investigation. And we believe this should concentrate the minds wonderfully, Mr. Biya, to cease these horrors and to negotiate quickly some kind of amicable resolution of the division of Cameroun between the English-speaking southern Cameroons and the French-speaking north. What happens at the International Criminal Court is after a complaint is filed, it is examined by the chief prosecutor, Mr. Bensanudu. She's from Gambia, has educated in Nigeria. And then there are 3 judges who would then examine the evidence. If there's reasonable cause to believe these horrors have been perpetrated, then the investigation goes into full gear, and ultimately there would be a trial before a tribunal of 15. And I want to underscore principles of international law that Mr. Biya and Mr. Macron, among others, should know about. It's the doctrine of command responsibility, supervisory responsibility. Simply because Mr. Biya or Mr. Macron are not actually pulling the trigger, lighting the match, wielding the machete, doesn't mean they're not criminally culpable. If they have supervisory or command control over those who are committing these crimes, they are every bit as much culpable as the actual wrongdoers themselves. Just like Slobodan Milosevic was culpable for all the horrors committed by his Serbian subordinates, whether in Srebrenica or otherwise. We also think that an initiative before the International Court of Justice, oftentimes called the World Court, is appropriate. It also sits in The Hague, and it entitles nations to sue each other claiming treaty violations. And it's altogether proper for Ambazonia to assert itself as an independent nation and sue Cameroun. Among other things, they flagrantly violating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and it would be a forum in which we can test the legitimacy of independence of Ambazonia from Cameroun by forcing the court to recognize our standing as a party in a jurisdiction where only nations have standing to sue and complain. In addition, in the United States, we have several vehicles to move forward to sanction and to cast sunshine on the horrors perpetrated by Mr. Biya and his henchmen. We have something called the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act, where we'll seek a listing of all those in Cameroun as well as in France who are complicit in violating internationally recognized fundamental human rights. Once you're listed and the decision is made by the President in consultation with Congress and the Secretary of State, you're denied visas, your assets are frozen, and you are stigmatized. And that's something that we will work very diligently on with the Congress of the United States. There is addition that we can seek to impose economic sanctions on countries that are complicit in a systematic violation of human rights. Deny aid from the World Bank, from the International Monetary Fund, deny any special trading privileges under AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, and further, what's critical in my mind, we need a military arms embargo. That is being imposed in Libya. We know that in Cameroon, the military training and weapons that are used purportedly against international terrorism is turned directly on the people of Ambazonia. Mr. Biya is engaged in warfare against his own people. And it's a true, I believe, mark of civilized behavior that the Ambazonians are fighting in self-defense. They're not picking civilian targets to retaliate against, but every person, every human being has a right to live. And if you're attacked, you have a right to kill your attacker if your life, serious limb is threatened. We also will be engaged in the process of drafting a constitution for the nation of Ambazonia that reflects the highest and best from the United States and other experience, to shows that no, we don't want a system that imitates Paul Biya, where he is the beginning and end of everything. He holds elections and he decides who the winner is. I mean, can you ever concede something more fraudulent than that? He even takes Vladimir Putin and President Xi in China to a new level. You vote, but he chooses who wins, irrespective of who it votes for. So we want to make certain a constitution is a nation's birth certificate. It's kind of your calling card for the rest of the world. And it needs to be explained in a way that's approachable to people. This is why we are adopting separation of powers, checks and balances. We don't want any group to be endowed with authority to oppress anyone else. Each group, each individual gets to march to their own drummer in a peaceful way, seeking fulfillment in what they find is their salvation on earth. It's also very important, in my judgment, that we seek allies. I can't and won't identify them now, but we need to recognize that, unfortunately, international law, international relations is not driven so much by philosophy, but by ulterior motives. Countries have interests. They do things because they believe they'll benefit economically, militarily. Well, what's in it for me? They're not in the business of altruism. Have you ever heard of a country saying, we practice philanthropy, right? Doesn't happen. So we need to be shrewd in finding, all right, who can we find out there? They may not like Macron. There may be things that Biya is doing that they find objectionable as well. New future allies with an independent Ambazonia. Perhaps you negotiate treaties with the United States, free trade agreements, maybe station AFRICOM there, all sorts of things that can be done to create incentives for those to say, yes, now there's something in it for me. Ambazonia has independence. We know right now, for example, huge point of resistance of the French to independence is all their economic investments in Ambazonia go out the window. So they'll fight to retain that. We need to make allies with people who would come in and replace them. All right, now I see this is an advantage for us. Anyway, all of these things have to be dealt with on a very granular basis because you're dealing with ulterior motives that are not high-minded. But we have to be willing to go there. If we just claim we're entitled to it because of justice, it's unfortunate but true. Well, good. Go ahead, eat justice for lunch. Is that going to prevent Mr. Biya from slaughtering you? No, it's not. It doesn't mean that in our individual lives we want to renounce idealism, no. But after all, we're talking about the fates of millions of people. And we don't want to make them martyred to a cause simply because we don't want to get our hands dirty. Obviously, we're not going to resort to violence other than self-defense. But those are the kinds of things that we have to accept. Finally, I want to remind all in the audiences that we can't necessarily control the speed of our destiny. We know ultimately we will have Ambazonia independence if we're resilient and we're persistent. But there are a whole host of flukish, odd things that happen in politics that accelerate or retard the speed with which things happen. We don't control all of those. So when you sign up, think of a climb of Mount Everest. We're kind of at the bottom of Mount Everest. We're going to get to the top. Now maybe if we have a helicopter, we get there faster. But we have to be willing, if necessary, to climb it all ourselves too. And it will make the destiny all the more glorious. And I think, finally, the wisdom of our founding father, Benjamin Franklin, will do us all well. During the period in which we were fighting for our independence from Great Britain, he reminded all who were divided at the time, if we don't hang together, we'll all hang separately. Thank you.
When I cry, do not turn your face from me in the day of my trouble. My enemies reproach me all day long. I have suffered, they will perish, but you, O Lord,